My name is Jane Robinette. I'm from Urbandale, Iowa. This bill focuses on the fetal heartbeat, and apparently there's some unknowns about that. From 4 to 8 weeks it can be detected. And at that time, and for some time to come, there is another heartbeat that it is dependent upon. So what about the heartbeat of the 12-year-old incest or rape survivor? What about the heartbeat of the 50-year-old mother of grown children? What about the heartbeat of the teenager who cuts herself because of emotional or psychological trauma, or who is suicidal? These are just a few examples of the heartbeats, the real women and their loved ones, whose constitutional rights would be trampled by this bill. Because the bill's definition of medical emergency, the only exception to the prohibition on abortion, excludes psychological conditions, emotional conditions, familial conditions, or the woman's age. That's outrageous. Please reject this dangerous and unconstitutional bill. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Sinclair and Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am Kimberly Laube, the Director of Life Ministries for Lutheran Family Service. And I direct the adoption agency and pregnancy counseling program that began in 1901 in Fort Dodge, Iowa. LFS is an original and founding member of the Coalition of Pro-Life Leaders. I would like to address a very specific question, and that is this. Does Iowa have the infrastructure to handle the number of children born to women who would have otherwise sought an abortion if it were not for a law prohibiting them from that abortion if a heartbeat was detected? So currently, Iowa reports abortion statistics in terms of those prior to 13-week gestation and those after 13-week gestation. In 2014, the State of Iowa Vital Statistic Report showed 283 children were aborted either surgically or medically that were over the age of 13 weeks, and all other abortions, which totaled 3,732, were performed at a gestational age of between 0 and 13 weeks. So we don't know an exact number, but we can use a national statistic to help us estimate what that number would be. So according to Guttmacher Institute, 2/3 of women have an abortion prior to 8 weeks gestation. So using that statistic, 1,232 of the 3,732 women who were reported to have abortions before 13 weeks would have had their abortion after a heartbeat could have been detected and would have been prevented from doing so. Now understand, I'm not a statistician, but I looked at these numbers and did my best to give you a good estimate. So using the assumptions I've described for you, in the state of Iowa, there may be 1,515 children being born to mothers who otherwise would have had an abortion. The National Council for Adoption has compiled quite a bit of data surrounding adoption and abortion. There is a national adoption rate of 7 babies to every 1,000 babies aborted or born to unwed mothers in the United States. This is called the Adoption Option Index. The National Council for Adoption broke out their numbers further and reported them on a state-by-state basis. And there were some very interesting findings, important enough that I would like to quote the National Council for Adoption about their findings, and here is what they had to say. In 2014, 4 states had adoption option indexes 3 or more times higher than the national average. Utah at 36.3, Arkansas 26.8, Montana 23.1, and Iowa at 21.4. There were 2 to 4 adoptions for every 100 abortions plus births to unmarried women in those states. And this suggests that in these states, women may have more extensive counseling, services, and facilities to orient pregnant women towards adoption, among other factors. End quote. That's good news. Iowa's Adoption Option Index appears to show that we currently have an infrastructure that helps us succeed at least 3 or 4 times the national average. According to various sites, including the Federalist, American Adoptions, and other websites, it is common use of the statistic of 2 million American couples waiting to adopt. That is approximately 36 couples waiting for every one infant adoption. It is not realistic to believe that all 1,515 extra births in Iowa annually would be placed for adoption. Our adoption option index would indicate it is somewhere around the additional 30 children, which would be placed for adoption. And there are multiple adoption agencies throughout Iowa besides Lutheran Family Service that could easily absorb an additional 30 placements. Some, of course, would be parented and may rely on welfare or other state aid. But vital statistics indicate that about 60% of the women seeking abortions in Iowa have some college education. That's more good news, because that means they are less likely to need welfare assistance throughout their entire lifetime. It will remain to be seen the impact this bill will have on our infrastructures, welfare, Medicaid, and adoption. But there are some indicators here that lead me to believe that we have a good foundation for support. And I rise in favor of Senate Study Bill 3143 and rejoice in the 1,515 lives that it will save annually. Thank you.
My name is Melissa Holst, and I'm from Urbandale. So, fun fact, if my family member was in a car accident and desperately needed a blood transfusion to live, and I was the only person on earth who could donate blood to save them, and even though donating blood is relatively easy, safe, and quick, no one can force me to give blood. Yes, even to save the life of a fully grown, autonomous person, it would be illegal to force me to donate blood if I didn't want to. See, we have this concept called bodily autonomy. It's this cultural notion that a person's control over their own body is important above all and must not be infringed upon. We don't even take life-saving organs from corpses unless that person, whose corpse it is, gave consent before their death. Even corpses get bodily autonomy. To tell people that they must sacrifice their bodily autonomy for 9 months against their will is an incredibly expensive, invasive, difficult process to save what you view as another human life. Debatable in the early stages especially. This is desperately unethical. You can't even ask people to sacrifice bodily autonomy to give up organs they aren't using anymore after they have died. Think about that for a minute. You're asking people who can become pregnant to accept less bodily autonomy than we grant to dead bodies. The women in this state deserve better than that.
Hi, I'm Laura Limix. I am the Executive Director of Restore by Grace, and I'm a founding member of the coalition. I, too, had an abortion at the age of 16. And for many years, I denied the fact of what happened that day, as well as the memories of what happened that day. Today, I work with women across the state of Iowa and in this Midwest region who are struggling following the decision to have an abortion. Many were never able to conceive a child again, and those that did were deeply disturbed when they first heard that first heartbeat. They immediately realized the abortion took the life of a baby. There was a beating heart, a human being, their baby. It left them to navigate grief, guilt, remorse, anger, depression, anxiety. The things that they thought were being resolved with the abortion were only escalated. They were affected mentally, emotionally, many times physically and spiritually. I'm going to be brief and just end with a couple questions. As a community nation state, what do we value? Should not our legislators and representatives protect and stand up for people that are young, both before birth and after? Thank you.
Daniel Zeno, ACLU of Iowa. I'll be quick. This bill is unconstitutional. We oppose the bill. This bill, as the doctor described, would ban abortions at around 6 weeks, which is unquestionably unconstitutional, and for some women would completely foreclose the option of any legal abortion. In addition, the exception in the bill for only the life of the mother and not the health of the mother, the courts have consistently held that every abortion ban or every restriction on abortion must include an exception for the health of the mother in addition to the life of the mother. This bill does not do that. And so for those two primary reasons, we oppose this bill. Thanks.
My name is Tom Chapman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa Catholic Conference. We represent the Catholic Bishops of Iowa. The Iowa Catholic Conference supports the life-affirming intent of heartbeat legislation. In fact, science shows that life begins at conception. We acknowledge the efforts of legislators and groups who challenge the current legal precedents to abortion. And we respect the fact that legislation often involves judgments about the most effective and timely means for advancing the protection of unborn children. At the same time, we should take into account that this bill is likely to be found unconstitutional. We should consider the unintended long-term consequences that could result from our court finding a robust right to an abortion in our state constitution, which could result in the elimination of some of our current limitations we already have in Iowa. Therefore, the Iowa Catholic Conference is registered neutral on the legislation. We remain committed to carefully reviewing this bill as it moves forward and assisting in efforts that are aimed at resolving differences related to specific language and strategies. We'd like to ask everyone to continue to work together in solidarity on ways to protect vulnerable people, including the unborn and others thought to be of little account. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Greg Baker. I lead a division of the Family Leader known as the Church Ambassador Network. Work with 1,800 evangelical churches across Iowa. And I'm speaking from the institution of the church this morning to the institution of government. You guys have a very difficult job on a very, very sensitive issue. And the government is the institution of justice. That is your main primary responsibility at the end of the day. And you are tasked, senators, to bring fair justice to all people. And that's not always easy. And we in the church, we do not have that authority. We can do our best to give you guidance from that. From the evangelical church, I obviously believe in the inerrancy of God's word. Not everyone in America believes that. That's the joys of religious liberty and the First Amendment. But it's also even a biblical principle as God gives people free will. But I do believe God is real, and I believe his Bible is true. And I do believe life even begins prior to conception in God's word. God has ordained every life, and he wants to live it to his fullest. God values life. He values life so much that he sent his son to die for our lives. And the church definitely needs to do a better job in helping the brokenhearted. There's many brokenhearted in this room. The church should not only rise and against God's laws bigger than against God's laws for life, and it protects people from death. But I appeal to you today as the kings of our land in America, as the institution of justice. There is a proverb that I think is very relevant for you all today. It's a mother writing to her son who was a king. She says, "Speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of those who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy." And you have the task to speak and bring justice for all life. That includes the mother, and it also includes the child in the womb. And that's a difficult task. We commend you for being willing to sponsor this bill. I am in favor of the bill, and we will continue to fight for the unborn child, and we will also continue to meet the needs of the mother in the church through all time, as God's word is timeless. Thank you so much this morning, and I appreciate you guys are just willing to sit and listen to everyone's testimony today. It's a beautiful picture of America's democracy.
Good morning. I'm Laura Hesberg with the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We oppose the bill and urge you to reject this legislation. Reproductive health services are an essential component of basic health care for all women, and victims of intimate partner violence have an acute need for timely access to reproductive health care, the full range, including abortion care. Restricting and banning abortion, it doesn't make it go away, but it does have a far greater impact on the safety of the health services that women receive. And for victims of violence, a bill like this negatively impacts their options for safety. Domestic violence is a pattern of coercion, abusive, threatening behaviors aimed at gaining power and control over someone. It forces victims to make difficult choices. It forces them to make choices based on how their partner might harm them and what happens to their children. I think everyone knows that approximately 1 in 3 people experience domestic violence at some point in their life. Most first experiences happen before age 25. The link between violence and reproductive health is profound. It is no wonder that the highest rates of unintended pregnancy are between 18 and 24, and that also corresponds to the highest prevalence of domestic violence. That's because reproductive coercion is an element of relationship violence. It occurs when a male partner uses intimidation and threats and violence to impose his intentions upon a woman against her will, regardless of whether those align with her choices. This includes acts of sexual violence, sabotaging contraception, pressuring a woman to become pregnant against her will, and coercing a woman to carry a pregnancy to term that she does not want. Iowa domestic violence service providers reported that overcoming barriers to accessing reproductive health care delayed the ability of women experiencing violence to receive care and often increased their risk of harm from an abusive partner. And too often these barriers were far too hard to overcome. And what many of them firsthand at numerous reports, many women returned to an abusive relationship they wanted to leave, and they carried an unintended pregnancy to term. Unintended pregnancy is the main reason that many women seek abortion care. Last year, Iowa eliminated the Medicaid family planning program that cut off access to local health care providers that made it a lot easier for people to access contraceptive services. And now this bill, thank you, I'm really sorry. That's so rude, I'm so sorry. And now this bill effectively bans access to safe legal abortion by making it illegal, essentially in our state, to obtain abortion care. So I think everyone in this room is against domestic violence. I believe that. But please understand that bills like this make it incredibly hard to address that problem. And you have to respect, as much as I respect all of you here, that this feels like coercion when you force and you close off every avenue a woman has to access safe health care and to keep herself safe and her family safe. It's essential that timely access to the full range of reproductive health services remain available to women. Eliminating health care options for women simply because we disagree with a woman's decision is simply bad policy. For victims of violence, it reinforces their loss of autonomy and places another obstacle in their path to safety. Please reject this legislation. Thank you. And thanks for the talk.
Good morning. I'm Rita Carter. I'm part of the Iowa Conference of the United Methodist Church Legislative Advocacy Team, and we are registered in opposition to this bill. I am a United Methodist, and I consider myself a person of faith, and we have in our church a set of social principles which have been debated, and refined over many years. And in paragraph 161, under the nurturing community, we have this to say about abortion. The beginning of life and the ending of life are the God-given boundaries of human existence. While individuals have always had some degree of control over when they die, they now have the awesome power to determine when and even whether new individuals will be born. Our belief in the sanctity of unborn human life makes us reluctant to approve abortion. But we are equally bound to respect the sacredness of life and the well-being of the mother and the unborn child. We recognize tragic conflicts of life with life that may justify abortion, and in such cases we support the legal option of abortion under proper medical procedures by certified medical providers. And it goes on after that. So we have a little bit of a nuanced position because we know people's lives are nuanced. And if I may insert a little bit of personal history, my husband and I waited, and we thought maybe it would never come, for 15 years before we had our first child. And I was in my upper 30s, which puts you at a greater risk. And we had some of the prenatal tests to determine various conditions, and kind of debated back and forth what we would do if they showed something we did not want them to show. Well, luckily they did not, but I had the option of choosing abortion if we felt that was for us, and I would not want someone else to not have that option. I know from history that women will always seek abortions and get abortions. This has happened over time. And to outlaw abortion totally would be to send it back to the back alleys where it's unsafe and, I might say, uncountable. So please oppose this legislation, and the United Methodist Church does value life, values all lives, children, the mothers, their families from birth and through all of the medical possibilities that they have, and through their whole lives. So we would want government to protect them their whole lives. Thank you.
How many speakers do we have left? We're down to about 10 minutes, and I would like to give a moment for the subcommittee members to speak. So if we could... Thank you, Sandy.
I prefer short anyway. Sandy Conlon with the Iowa Medical Society. I want to be clear, the Medical Society does not have a position on abortion, but on this particular bill we need to weigh in. And some of the points were raised earlier, but I just want to let you know that it is true that the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education would very likely remove our OBGYN training program from the University of Iowa if this were to become law, because they do, while they also do not have a position on abortion, they do require there to be an option for residents in that training program to receive that training. And so this would not only affect OBGYN training at the University of Iowa, but all subspecialties, including ones for gynecological cancer treatments and physicians, and also for high-risk pregnancies. So our opposition is based on the concern for losing that residency program at the University of Iowa, which trains, I think, at least 1/4 of the OBGYNs that practice in the state of Iowa. So, thank you.
Chuck Hurley, Family Leader, thanks for bringing this bill. Senator Zahn, I especially want to thank you for being a leader. I think we're probably all here primarily because of advances in fetology and sonography. I think everybody in the room knows that that baby is a human. We can see into the womb now. That has changed everything. We've heard a lot of very important concerns. My view, my wife's view, my wife even wears a bumper sticker, says, love them both. We are commanded to love our neighbor as ourselves. That includes you and every woman who's been traumatized or had difficult decisions to make. However, because of fetology and so forth, there's one truth that we just can't avoid. We can't argue away. That baby is a baby. It's a fellow human being. And I just have one point on the law that I want to make quickly. But before that, I just want to ask not a rhetorical question, an actual question. Is there anybody in this room? Let me preface it by saying this. You're rule makers. The golden rule is to treat others the way we want to be treated. Is there anybody in this room who, honest to God, wishes that they'd been aborted? That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about, is treating others the way we would want to be treated. That's the bottom line in every rule you make, in every law you pass. We're to treat others the way we would want to be treated. And those are difficult decisions. But because we know that's a baby in the womb, you are advancing legislation to protect those babies. Because none of us held up our hands. It's true. That's the greatest rule of all. On the law, we've heard from a couple people saying this is unconstitutional. I want to emphasize to you folks, you know this, but it bears repeating. The first two sections of our Iowa Constitution tell you that you are here for a purpose, and that is to protect the citizens. You have a duty that you can't abdicate to the courts. You have a duty to protect people. When you pass a law that protects people, then the courts have it in their hands. And if they decide to overturn what you have passed, the blood is on their hands. But you have a duty, and I thank you for taking that duty seriously. And no one knows, 2.5 to 4 years from now, that's the length of time it takes to get up to the Supreme Court. No one knows the makeup of the United States Supreme Court 2.5 years from now. What you do today could very well become law. And you have a moment in time and a responsibility as lawmakers to pass a law that loves them both and that treats others the way you would want to be treated. Thank you.
Did we have one more, or was that?
All right. Good morning, Senator Sinclair, Senator Schultz, and Senator Peterson. I'm Scott Valencia. I'm the chairman of the Coalition of Pro-Life Leaders, and I appreciate you guys taking time today to hear us in this subcommittee. It's not a secret that the coalition believes the life begins at fertilization. That is our gold standard, and we believe that's the direction that Iowa should eventually get to. But we also understand that this striving to get to life at fertilization, which we believe life has all value, there are specific points within that standard that causes challenge for both leadership and the members of the Senate. So we see that this bill creates protections at a fundamental level that any person, no matter political affiliation or education level, can understand. If a heartbeat exists, there is life. I'd also like to quickly address a couple of key points. Senator Peterson stated that if this law was passed, we'd lose our OBGYN residency and the medical practice would fall into disrepair in the state of Iowa. That kind of concerns me because according to the statement of the several school processes, the postgraduate training programs are combined to prepare practicing obstetricians and to be adept at caring for female reproductive organs and their health and the management of pregnancy. So either our programs aren't set up well to begin with, because if all of them are going to leave because we stop finding better ways to take lives, we have a bigger problem to be looking at here. If our programs were set up to take care of women's reproductive health and their organs, and to help with the pregnancies, you would think that people would be flocking to our program as opposed to running from our program. We also heard today that women's health should be the main spotlight. I agree with that. A person's health is the most important thing that we should always be looking at. But what I struggle with is how taking a life is necessarily an individual health choice. And when it is, this bill gives doctors the ability to go ahead and make decisions if it impacts the woman's physical health in an emergency situation. So again, I just find confusing topics when we have these conversations. The last thing is that it seems many people today that have been speaking have tried very hard in their statements to avoid the comment that a heartbeat means life. They talk all around the topic. I've even heard one of the doctors carefully take a couple of deep breaths when she was trying to articulate an argument, but nobody ever makes the statement that a heartbeat does not mean life. So at the core of this bill that we're looking at today is, does a heartbeat mean that there is a life there? And then in the state of Iowa, do we protect those that are alive? Simply stated, thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you very much. That was the last speaker who had requested to speak. We are at a place, we are at a time limit, but I would like to give any senator at the table an opportunity to make a comment or ask questions if you needed. Senator Bertrand, you're in order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I truly appreciate all the comments on both sides of this as we went through this very tough issue. My comment that struck me is for Tom Chapman with the Catholics. As a practicing Catholic, I got to be honest, I sit here, I'm very disappointed that we're neutral. I think we need to go back to the bishops and make a statement. I am calling this out. If you're neutral, you're against the bill. So again, I expect this to be revisited within our Catholic community and to either be opposed or support it. Thank you.
Senator Bolcom, you're in order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last year, GOP legislators playing doctor erected 6 new barriers for women to get the health care they needed. But that's not all they did. They gutted essential family planning services that so far we've seen a 50% reduction in the number of Iowa women receiving the essential family planning services and a 33% reduction in providers. Senator Sinclair, your efforts to push through that GOP program have been a failure. But this bill today is the new form of abuse, coercion, and harassment of Iowa women. It's time for, as somebody said earlier today, you are hurting the women in this state. Time for GOP politicians to stop playing politics and to stop this cruel assault on Iowa women.
Senator Chapman, you're in order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't intend to speak, but this bill protects the life of the most innocent and vulnerable Iowans. And I would call on Democrats to quit the assault on innocent children. Innocent children. What crime have they committed? We have a government that you are innocent until proven guilty, right? And we talked about how we have bodily autonomy. You're right. A baby has its own DNA, has its own blood type, has its own heartbeat. As an EMT, we have an obligation to treat someone that has a heartbeat. And while this bill doesn't go as far as what I would like to see, I commend you, Senator Zahn, Senator Sinclair, for bringing this bill forward.